I want to tell you about the barbecue, not the one in Vietnam, the one in Toledo, Ohio, in my brother Gary's backyard on a Sunday afternoon in June, 3 years and 4 months ago, when I told 14 members of my extended family that I was moving to Vietnam. I want to tell you about the barbecue, because the barbecue is where the title of this video comes from, and because the reaction I got at that barbecue is the reason some of you are watching this right now. You told someone you were thinking about moving somewhere that wasn't in their mental catalog of acceptable places, and the response you got was a version of what I got, which was silence followed by a question that wasn't really a question. It was a verdict dressed up as a question. My sister-in-law, Denise, who has never left the state of Ohio except for a cruise to the Bahamas in 2014, that she still talks about as though it were an expedition to the Arctic, looked at me across a paper plate of potato salad and said, "You're going to Vietnam?" She said Vietnam the way you'd say prison, or Mars, or the bottom of the ocean, like it was a destination that existed only in the context of something having gone terribly wrong. And the table went quiet. And 14 people looked at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern to the specific look that my brother Gary has when he thinks someone is making a decision that he'll have to help clean up later. And I sat there with a hamburger getting cold, and I thought, every single person at this table loves me, and every single person at this table is wrong about this. My name is Robert Callahan. Most people call me Bobby. 63 years old. Former parts manager at a Ford dealership in Toledo, Ohio for 28 years. Current resident of Vung Tau, Vietnam, a coastal city about 2 hours southeast of Ho Chi Minh City, where I live in a 2-bedroom apartment 4 blocks from the beach for $320 a month, where I eat seafood that was in the ocean this morning for less than the cost of a fast food meal in Toledo, where I have friends I see every day, and a routine that involves the South China Sea and a motorbike and a Vietnamese coffee that has ruined me for every other coffee on earth, and where every single one of my financial numbers works. Not barely works. Works with room, works with margin, works the way they never worked in Toledo, not once, not in the last 7 years of living there. 3 years and 4 months now, and the people at that barbecue, 2 of them have asked me in private, separately, how to do what I did. They didn't ask at the barbecue. They asked later, quietly, the way people ask about things they've been thinking about for longer than they want to admit. I need to tell you about Toledo because Toledo is the context. And without the context, you might think this is a story about adventure. It is not a story about adventure. It is a story about arithmetic. I grew up in Toledo, West Side, near the old Jeep plant. My father worked at the plant for 31 years and retired with a pension that was worth something back then, back when pensions were real, and Toledo was a city that made things, and the people who made things could afford to live in the city where they made them. I went into automotive because automotive was what existed in Toledo if you weren't going to college. And I wasn't going to college because college wasn't what happened in my family, not out of inability, but out of economic gravity. The kind where the job is there now and the degree takes 4 years and the family needs now more than it needs 4 years from now. I started at Jim's Auto Parts on Secor Road when I was 19, sweeping the warehouse, pulling stock, learning the part numbers the way you learn anything you do every day for years, by absorption, by repetition, by the slow accumulation of knowledge that eventually becomes expertise, that nobody calls expertise because it happened on a warehouse floor instead of in a classroom. I moved to the Ford dealership at 23, hired as a parts counter associate, moved to the parts warehouse, became assistant parts manager at 30, parts manager at 34. Parts manager at a Ford dealership is the person who knows where 17,000 different parts are, which ones are in stock, which ones need to be ordered, which ones have been discontinued and what replaces them, which ones the service department needs by Thursday, or the customer's F-150 sits on the lift over the weekend, and the customer calls the general manager, and the general manager calls you. It is a job of precision and memory and relationships with vendors, and the patience to deal with back-ordered components and recalled inventory and the occasional technician who swears the part you gave him is wrong when it is, in fact, the correct part, and the problem is elsewhere. I was good at it, 28 years good at it. I knew every part number for every Ford model going back to 2003 from memory, and the ones before that I could find in under 90 seconds in the catalog system I'd helped build. That knowledge lived in my head like a second language. It still does. I still know that a 2011 F-150 alternator is part number GL995. It doesn't help me in Vietnam, but it's in there. The way all the things you were good at stay in there after the job that needed them doesn't exist anymore. The dealership closed its parts department in a consolidation. Not the whole dealership, the parts department, outsourced to a regional fulfillment center that handled inventory for 11 dealerships across Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. The announcement came in March on a Tuesday at a meeting I wasn't told was a meeting until I was in it. The general manager, who I'd worked with for 9 years and who I considered a friend in the way that work friends are friends, meaning genuinely, but within a perimeter, told me that the position was being eliminated, that the consolidation was effective in 60 days, and that my severance would reflect my years of service. He said this with the expression of someone delivering news he didn't choose but also didn't fight. I thanked him because I'm from Toledo, and in Toledo you thank people even when the thing they're telling you is that 28 years of your life in this building are worth 60 days of transition. I drove home and sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Not because I was crying, because I was calculating how long the severance would last, what the unemployment would be, what the job market looked like for a 58-year-old parts manager in a region where automotive was contracting. The calculation was not encouraging. I should tell you about the divorce, because the divorce is part of the financial architecture, and you need to understand the architecture to understand why Vietnam became the answer. I was married to Linda for 22 years. We divorced when I was 51. It was not dramatic in the way that divorces sometimes are. It was the slow version, the kind that arrives after the kids leave and the house gets quiet, and the two people in the quiet discover that the quiet is all they have left. We split the house equity, which was not a large number because the Toledo housing market has not been a generous market for a long time. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the south side. The apartment was $780 a month in 2014. By the time I lost the parts department job in 2020, it was $940 a month. I had not moved. Toledo had not become a more desirable city, but the rent had increased by 20% in 6 years because rent does what rent does regardless of what happens to the city or to you. After the dealership, I spent 11 months looking for work. I want to be clear about this because the easy narrative, the one that people who haven't been in this situation default to, is that the person who moved to a foreign country didn't try hard enough at home. I tried. I applied to every parts department, every auto parts chain, every warehouse operation within 40 miles of Toledo. I applied to O'Reilly, to AutoZone, to Advance Auto Parts, to 3 independent dealerships, to a marine supply company, to a construction equipment distributor that I heard was hiring through a friend of a friend. The responses came in 2 varieties. The first was the automated rejection, the email that arrives faster than any human could have read your application, which tells you that the filter caught something, probably your age, probably the salary history, probably both. The second was the interview that went well right up until the part where they discussed compensation, at which point the number they offered was approximately what I'd made in 1998. Adjusted for nothing, I was 58 years old with 28 years of specialized experience in a field that had decided to regionalize and automate, and that had no particular use for the man whose knowledge lived in his head rather than in their new software system. I took a part-time position at an auto parts chain store, making $13.25 an hour for 26 hours a week. This is not a complaint. This is the number. 1325 times 26 is $344.50 a week before taxes, approximately $1,250 a month after taxes. My rent was $940, or do that arithmetic. I could not. Social Security at 62 was the next step because it was the only step available. Early Social Security, which is not full Social Security, which is the reduced version that you take when waiting until 67, is a luxury that your financial situation has specifically and clearly removed from the table. My benefit at 62 was $1,060 a month. I kept the part-time job at the auto parts store, which brought total income to approximately $2,300 a month, which in Toledo, Ohio, in a 1-bedroom apartment with utility costs and health insurance and food and gas and the other non-optional expenses of existing as a human being in the American Midwest, produced a monthly surplus of approximately $110. $110 for everything else. For any car repair, for any medical expense not covered by the plan I'd cobbled together through the marketplace, for any unanticipated cost of any kind, for any version of life beyond the absolute minimum mechanical requirements of survival. $110 a month of margin between me and a problem I couldn't solve. And that margin was narrowing because the part-time hours at the store were not guaranteed, and some months were 22 hours a week, and some months were 18, and the rent was going up in September. And I could see the convergence approaching with the clarity of someone who spent 28 years tracking inventory levels and knowing exactly when the stock was about to run out. I found the videos the way everyone finds the videos. Late at night, alone, in a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of Toledo, with the television off and the phone in my hand and the particular quiet that exists in an American apartment at 1 in the morning when you can't sleep because you've done the math for the 4th time this week, and it hasn't changed. The algorithm showed me a video of a man approximately my age sitting on a balcony somewhere tropical, talking about how much he paid in rent. The number was impossible. I watched it twice. Then I watched 3 more videos by different people. Then I opened a browser and searched for cost of living in Southeast Asia, which led to Thailand, which led to the Philippines, which led to Vietnam, which led to a specific set of numbers that I copied into the Notes app on my phone with the reflex of someone who has been writing down part numbers for 3 decades. Rent in Vietnamese coastal cities, $200 to $400. Food at local restaurants, $2 to $5 per meal. Healthcare, $10 to $15 for a doctor's visit. I looked at these numbers for a long time. Then I looked at the $110 of a monthly margin I had in Toledo. Then I looked at the Vietnamese numbers again, and I felt something shift, not dramatically, quietly, like a part clicking into place, which is, when I think about it, the most appropriate metaphor available to a parts manager. The book that changed how I thought about leaving was called You Were Never Meant to Stay. I found it mentioned in a forum thread by someone who was describing not the logistics of moving abroad, but the guilt of it. The guilt was what I recognized, not the travel logistics, not the visa questions, not the housing research. The guilt, the specific guilt of a man from Toledo, Ohio, whose father worked at the Jeep plant for 31 years and whose grandfather worked at a glass factory for 27 years before that, considering leaving. Because in Toledo, staying is not just a decision, it's an identity, it's loyalty. It's what the men in my family did. They stayed. They worked the job that was there. They lived in the city where the job was. They didn't leave because leaving meant something about your character that nobody wanted said about their character. And the book understood that specific weight. It didn't tell me to be brave or to follow my dreams, which would have been useless because bravery and dreams are not what keep a parts manager in Toledo. What keeps a parts manager in Toledo is the belief that leaving is a form of quitting. And the book took that belief apart with precision, not cruelty. It asked, what are you being loyal to? And when I answered honestly, when I sat in the apartment at midnight and answered honestly, I found that what I was being loyal to was a version of Toledo that didn't exist anymore. The Jeep plant had changed ownership 3 times. The glass factories were mostly gone. The neighborhood I grew up in had a 30% vacancy rate. I was being loyal to a memory, not a place. And loyalty to a memory when the memory can't feed you or house you or give you margin beyond $110 is a form of self-harm dressed up as virtue. The link to the book is in the description. If you recognized anything in what I just said, anything about staying because leaving feels like betrayal, read it. It doesn't solve the logistics. It solves the lock. My daughter Jenny was the one I told first. Jenny lives in Detroit, works in hospital administration, has 2 kids that I love with a ferocity that sometimes surprises me. I called her on a Wednesday evening, which is when we usually talk, and I told her what I'd been researching. I told her the numbers. I told her about the margin, the $110, the convergence I could see coming. I told her about Vietnam. She was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. And then she said something that I carry with me. She said, Dad, I've watched you get smaller for 6 years. Get smaller, not sadder, not poorer, not more stressed. Smaller. like the life was compressing me, reducing the dimensions of who I was to fit the dimensions of what I could afford. I've watched you get smaller. I didn't say anything for a while after that, and she said, if the numbers work, go see if they're real. But go, because I need my dad back at full size. Full size. That's what she said. I bought a plane ticket the next morning, one way. I flew from Detroit Metro to Ho Chi Minh City with a connection in Tokyo. 18 hours of travel. I sat in the Tokyo terminal during the layover with a notebook and rewrote the numbers one more time because the numbers were my anchor and I needed to hold on to something while I was headed toward a country I had never been to on a continent I had never been to. I landed in Saigon at 11 at night, and the first thing that hit me was the heat. Not like Toledo heat in August. This was a different heat, alive, that smelled like exhaust and jasmine and grilled meat and rain that had recently fallen. I took a bus to Vung Tau the next morning, 2 hours on a road that showed me more of Vietnam than 3 weeks of research had. Rice paddies, small towns with markets that spilled onto the road. Motorbikes carrying things that I would not have believed a motorbike could carry, including, memorably, a refrigerator. The bus dropped me in Vung Tau, and I stood on the sidewalk with my suitcase and the address of a guest house that a man named Dave from Michigan had recommended. The guest house was $12 a night. I woke up the first morning to the smell of pho from a cart across the street, and I thought, this smells like a place I could live? Vung Tau is not the Vietnam that most Americans picture. It's a mid-sized coastal city on a peninsula in southern Vietnam. Population about 500,000, with beaches on the eastern side and a city center that is entirely, unapologetically, a real Vietnamese city where people live and work and sit on plastic chairs on the sidewalk at night drinking bia hoi, the fresh draft beer brewed daily and sold for approximately 40 cents a glass. Vung Tau has a small expat community, but it is not an expat city. It is a Vietnamese city where some foreigners live. This distinction matters because the prices are Vietnamese prices, not foreign prices. Dave from Michigan described it this way. It's a real city where the numbers are real. Real city, real numbers. That's what a parts manager needs. The numbers. My income, Social Security of $1,060 per month. I quit the part-time job before I left. I have a small savings I draw on, approximately $50 a month. Total monthly available, approximately $1,110. That's it. No pension, no investments, just Social Security and a modest savings account. Housing, 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor, 10-minute walk from the beach. Balcony facing east, morning sun, afternoon sea breeze. Landlord Mr. Tuan lives on the 1st floor and fixes anything within 24 hours because he takes pride in his building. Rent, $320. Electricity averaged $28. Water, $4. Internet fiber, $15. Phone, $8. Total housing and utilities, $375. In Toledo, my 1-bedroom alone was $940. Healthcare, private insurance for foreign residents, $80 a month, covering hospitalization and major events. Clinic 6 blocks away, doctor's visit, $8 total. Blood pressure medication that cost $75 a month in Toledo, $9 here. Same medication, same manufacturer, same dosage. Cholesterol medication, $18 a month versus over $100 in the States. Total monthly health care, approximately $130. Food. Banh mi for breakfast, 75 cents to $1.50. Po or rice plate for lunch, $2 to $4. Seafood dinner from a restaurant where the shrimp came from a tank in the front, $6 or $7. Monthly food, $210. In Toledo, I spent $350 on food that was less fresh and less interesting. Transportation, used motorbike bought for $280. Monthly fuel, $9. Everything else, haircuts at $2, coffee at 50 cents, laundry, the occasional evening out, approximately $90. Grand total monthly expenses, $805. Monthly income, $1,110. Monthly surplus, $305 every month. In Toledo, my margin was $110 on a good month. Here it's $305 and I live better. Better food, larger apartment, 4 blocks from the beach, regular doctor visits. The numbers are not just positive, they are transformative. Dave from Michigan is still here. He's the first person I had a beer with in Vung Tau, and he remains one of the most important relationships I've built. Dave is 67, retired postal worker from Grand Rapids, divorced, 2 adult kids, arrived in Vietnam 4 years before me, and built a life that he describes as the first life I actually chose on purpose. He showed me the city in the first week with the patience of someone who remembers what it's like to arrive, which not everyone remembers, which is what makes Dave valuable, beyond his knowledge of which streets flood in rainy season and which seafood restaurants have the freshest crab. He remembers the disorientation. He remembers the first time the numbers worked and the feeling of not quite believing them. He told me on the 3rd day, sitting at a Bia Hoi place on the beach road with the sun going down, Bobby, the numbers are going to keep working. You're going to wake up every month and check, and they're going to keep working, and at some point you're going to stop checking because you trust it. That's the part that takes the longest, trusting that it works. He was right. It took me about 8 months to stop checking every morning. Now I check once a month. The numbers still work. Denise said at the barbecue, "You'll be alone over there." I am less alone here than I was in Toledo, which is precisely true. In Toledo I went to work, came home, watched television, went to bed. My social life was the residue of a life that had contracted around the job and the marriage, both of which were gone. Here I have Dave. I have a group of about 8 expats and a British guy named Colin, who I argue with about sports and politics, and who is one of the closest friends I've had since I was 25. I have Mr. Han, who owns my morning coffee cafe, and who does not speak English beyond "Good morning, Bobby," and same, but with whom I've developed a friendship that operates on daily presence and the occasional game of chess that he wins every time. I have Lan at the market, who has been teaching me the Vietnamese names of every fruit and vegetable for 2 years with the seriousness of a professor. I am embedded in this place, not as a visitor, as a person who lives here. The honest parts. The heat from April through September is substantial and requires adjustment. I adapted in 2 months. I drink more water than ever and schedule outdoor time for early morning and late afternoon. The language is the ongoing challenge. Vietnamese is tonal, and I have been studying for 3 years and can conduct basic transactions and simple conversations. I use a translation app for anything complex, and the Vietnamese people I interact with have been, without exception, patient and generous with corrections. The visa paperwork is specific and sometimes contradictory. I approach it the way I approached back-ordered parts. Document everything. Follow up consistently. Don't lose your temper. It resolves. Jenny came to visit in the 8th month. She brought the kids, Marcus, who is 11, and Abby, who is 8. They stayed for 10 days. Marcus discovered the beach on day 1 and did not willingly leave it for the remaining 9 days. Abby discovered the market with Lan and spent 3 days learning the names of fruits that she had never seen before, repeating the Vietnamese words with the absolute confidence of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned to be self-conscious about pronunciation, which meant she was better at it than I am after 3 years. On the last night, Jenny and I sat on my balcony after the kids were asleep, and she was quiet for a long time, looking at the lights of the fishing boats on the water. And then she said, "Dad, you're full size again." She remembered what she'd said on the phone. "I've watched you get smaller." And now, sitting on a balcony in a city that nobody at Gary's barbecue could have found on a map, she was telling me that whatever had been compressing me had stopped, that the dimensions were back. I didn't say anything. Some things are better received in silence. I want to talk to you now, specifically to you, the person watching this, at some hour that isn't normal, on a phone, in an apartment or a house where the numbers don't work. Who did the math this week? And the math said the same thing it said last week, and the week before that, and the month before that. Who works a job that doesn't pay what you're worth? Or who doesn't have a job at all, and who has been told, directly or indirectly, that your age is the problem, as though the 30 years of knowledge in your head became a liability the moment the calendar crossed a number? Who has a sister-in-law or a brother or a parent or a friend who will say Vietnam the way Denise said it, like it's a punchline or a warning? I know that person. I was at that barbecue. I heard the silence after I said the word, and I went anyway, not because I'm braver than you, because the math was louder than the silence, and the math does not care what Denise thinks. And the book, You Were Never Meant to Stay. If the guilt is the part that's keeping you, if staying feels like loyalty and leaving feels like betrayal, read it. It separates the real from the inherited. It asks what you're actually loyal to and whether that thing is loyal to you in return. The link is in the description. It won't answer the visa questions or the healthcare logistics. It will unlock the thing in your chest that tightens every time someone says the name of the country like it's a verdict. Gary called me last month, not for the family check-in, which happens on Sundays. He called on a Thursday afternoon, which is unusual. He was quiet in a way that Gary is not usually quiet. Gary being a man who has filled silences with words for as long as I've known him, which is my entire life. And he said, "Oh, Bobby, Denise has been looking at your pictures." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "She's been looking at the food and the beach and the apartment." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "She asked me what I thought about going somewhere like that when I retire." Gary retires in 14 months. He's a facilities manager at a school district. His pension is decent, but Toledo is getting more expensive, and the house needs work, and the math, Gary's math, is starting to look like my math looked 3.5 years ago. I told him I'd send him the spreadsheet that started in a notes app on my phone at 1 a.m. in a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of Toledo. The spreadsheet that now has 3 years of actual data, real numbers, real expenses, real margin, $305 a month of margin. That is real. I told him to look at the numbers and then we'd talk, because the numbers are what convinced me, and the numbers are what will convince Gary, because Gary is from Toledo, and in Toledo, like in every place that men like us are from, the numbers are the only language that overrides the guilt. I'm sitting at Mr. Han's Cafe. It's 7 in the morning. The Hallway Suada is in front of me, dripping through the filter the way it does, slow and deliberate, dark coffee over condensed milk over ice, and I am watching the street wake up. A woman is setting up her banh mi cart across the road. 2 men on motorbikes have stopped to talk to each other in the middle of the intersection, which is how intersections work here, and which no longer alarms me. The sea is 4 blocks to my left, and I can smell it. It smells like salt and morning, and the particular clean smell that ocean air has before the city fully wakes up and adds its own layers. The notebook is in my pocket. The numbers from this month are in it. They work 3 years and 4 months, and they work every time. And the people at the barbecue, the 14 people who looked at me like I'd said something that needed to be corrected, as they're watching this. Some of them anyway. Hi, Denise. The potato salad was good. Vietnam is better. Come see.